Hello friends and welcome back. Buddy here at Haas of Props, and in today's video I'm going to show you how I made this 3D printed Obi-Wan lightsaber look like it's actually made out of metal and not plastic. We got to see the amazing Sir Alec Guinness use the saber in A New Hope, and recently we were able to see Ewan McGregor wield it in the Kenobi series from Disney+. When it comes to 3D prints, this is possibly one of the easiest to assemble. I designed it in a way that no internal supports are needed, but all you need to do is get the pieces and you're ready to go. So let's get started. When designing the pieces for the lightsaber, I wanted to keep assembly relatively easy, so I made the pieces with attached supports. That way the pieces just slip together, making it quick, easy, and efficient. But before attaching everything, I gave all the pieces a going over with a 120 grit sandpaper on my hand sander. Since the pieces need to be really clean and smooth, we're going to start with a low grit and eventually work our way up to a really fine grit. This will get rid of the majority of the print lines. Once finished with the 120, I swap out for some 240 and sand all the pieces again. While I do that, I would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button, if you haven't already. It's free to you and will really help this channel grow, and if you click the notification bell, YouTube will let you know when new project releases, that way you won't miss out on anything. Thank you. With all the pieces sanded and ready to go, we can begin assembly. I start with the base piece, and using some E6000, I squeeze some onto the support peg on top. E6000 remains rubbery when it dries and it won't crack and break as easily as other glues, but it takes longer to cure, so to help speed up the assembly time, I use some CA glue around the outer edges of the pieces. The CA glue will hold the pieces together and let us finish assembly without pieces remaining loose and trying to move on us. When everything is coated with glue, the next piece can be slid onto the peg. To make the CA glue cure even faster, I will often use Zip Kicker. Just a few drops onto the glue will cause it to cure in just seconds. Then the next piece can be added the same way, except this time I squeeze the glue into the hole instead of onto the supports. Then the blade emitter can be glued onto the end of the main hilt. The control area of the saber has two sets of double holes, some deeper ones and two that are more shallow and slightly offset of each other. These offset ones is where the rectangular control piece attaches. The controls pegs are also offset in order to help with orientation. Obi-Wan's saber has a dial that sticks into the grip area, and on small pieces like this, I don't bother about using both glues. I will simply just use CA glue. Then back on the control area, the medium-sized dial can be glued into the bottom hole, and the smaller one can be glued into the top. Then the clip ring can be attached into the pommel cap holes. And with that last bit of assembly is finished, and now we can finish smoothing the surface so we get that manufactured metal look. When 3D printing pieces, some areas can be a little rough and sanding will only do so much. These areas are usually the base of a piece or where the piece was supported with supports. To help smooth these areas, I'm using some glazing and spot putty. To apply, I just use a palette knife and thickly smear it into the areas that need it. You could argue that this step could have been done before assembly, and you'd probably be right, but in for a penny, in for a pound. For the next step, I thin some of the Bondo with some acetone so the consistency is like a watery acrylic paint. Then using an old brush, I paint this onto the saber surface. This will help fill in any remaining print lines in any hard to reach areas. Once it's dry, I smooth the putty with some 400 grit sandpaper. This will remove any brush marks in the putty and even out any areas where the putty is too thick. When the entire saber is sanded, you can notice how the surface is really starting to get smooth, but we're not smooth enough yet. So we want to apply at least 2 coats of a 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. I will usually spray one layer, let it dry for over an hour, and then spray the next layer. You don't want to spray too heavily or you will get runs, which means more work, so light, thin layers is the key here. Once the 2-in-1 is completely dry, it can be sanded with some 400 grit sandpaper. Sanding this time will remove any unevenness in the primer layers. You just want to make sure you haven't lost any of the detail around the edges or finer details. If need be, you can remove the primer with a hobby knife in these spots. The final sanding stage will really polish up the surface and let us achieve a perfect metal finish. To do this, we're going to wet sand. Begin by brushing a little bit of water onto the area of your print with a fine bristle brush. Then take some 1000 grit sandpaper and sand the wet area. This will give you a super smooth surface that has a shine to it. With everything sanded, we can begin painting. The first step is to spray the piece with some glossy black spray paint. You want to build up complete coverage by adding thin layer to thin layer. This way you can avoid drips, and the cheaper the paint is, like the one I'm using, the more likely it is to run. You can see here how all that sanding has paid off. The gloss paint makes every detail pop, and the smoother the surface, the more brilliant the shine. When I know the black gloss is completely dry and won't peel, I cover the hand grip and the main hilt with plastic and masking tape so these areas will remain black. Then the rest of the saber can be sprayed with some metallic silver. Apply the silver the same way as the black, thin layer on thin layer. The reason for spraying the black first was by having a really shiny black layer under the silver, it allows the silver to really shine and not lose its brilliance. When the silver has dried, the plastic and the tape can be removed from the black areas. Then this little control can be painted with some metallic deep bronze. Since this is such a small area, I'm using a round bristle brush and being very careful so I don't get any on the saber hilt. Next, this area of the focusing ring can be painted with some metallic light bronze. You may find that you need to apply several layers in order to achieve evenness. In my case, I needed 3. The reason for this is actually a good thing in a way. The surface is so smooth, the brush will just push the paint around since there's hardly any texture on the microscopic level to catch the paint. This isn't a problem. Multiple layers and light brush marks will still work. The central part of the rectangular control can be painted with the metallic light bronze as well. And the metallic deep bronze can be used on the shaft right here under the blade emitter. With all the painting finished, the next step is to adjust the blade emitter color so it's slightly different from the rest of the saber. To do this, I buff on some graphite powder. Take a cotton ball and dip it into the graphite powder, and then buff and rub this onto the blade emitter. Since we're applying this to a silver surface instead of black, the change is subtle, but it's enough to change the color variation. You can also use a Q-tip to get into the hard-to-reach areas as well. Here you can see how the emitter is slightly darker than the silver on the control area and the pommel. In order to keep the graphite from smudging, we want to seal it with some gloss clear coat. It'll only take 1 coat, but we only want to apply it to the emitter tip and not the entire saber. And after that dries, you are left with a highly detailed Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber as seen in Star Wars A New Hope, which looks as if it was made with steel and brass pieces instead of being completely plastic. And with that, friends, the build is finished. You can see how the time spent with all the sanding has paid off by allowing us to achieve the smooth, clean surface necessary for the plastic to look like metal when it's painted. This is a technique I have found to work really well. Let me know what you think of it, or if you have found one that works just as well. I'd love to hear about it, so let me know in the comments below. If you would like to make one of these lightsabers for yourself, there's a link to the pieces in the below description. I hope you enjoyed this build. Please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, family, and anyone else you can think of. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at Haas of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.